Okay. So I hope you can see all of that.
Yep.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. So I was the PI on this project, which looks at how we feed the research and innovation pipeline. So myself and my co-I, who's Paulette Williams, working with Leading Roots, who are our project partners, we wanted to look at awarding gaps in particular, on the basis that the award of a good degree, so that's a 2-1 or a first, appears to matter in quite material ways, like securing a place on a postgraduate taught course or a job in a graduate scheme, but also in social ways to do with things like your self-esteem and validating your knowledge. So the data, this image, this slide on the reduction in the awarding gap was our starting point for this research and our interest in this research. In particular, this period here between 2019 and 2021, when the undergraduate awarding gap between white and all other racially minoritized students significantly narrowed from 12.3% to 8.6%, which is the largest reduction in 16 years. And these coincided with the COVID-19 pandemic and the mitigations that were brought in by universities, leading to changed assessments and the widespread use of no detriment policies. But as COVID-19 mitigations were lifted, not only internal data, but also now external data that's been collected since then on awarding gaps shows that the gap has returned once more and is widening. At the same time, universities, which we know have limited resources and pulls on their budget, are under pressure from an upward accountability to the regulators to meet their targets and wishes for a narrowed awarding gap. So Paulette, who is the head of student success at UCL, and I are aware of how then discussions on awarding gaps, reflecting on this period in the reduction, can come to focus on the role of assessments or similar touch points in an attempt to reproduce the reduction in the awarding gap. And what we worry about is that in this environment, that focusing on no detriment policies to narrow the gap once more and to meet OFS targets risks two things when it comes to meaningfully feeding the research and innovation pipeline for racially minoritized graduates. The first is that the dominant narrative of COVID-19 mitigations narrowing the awarding gap risks obscuring other COVID impacts and any new equality gaps that form for this group, for example, from increased caring responsibilities. The second risk is that this narrow focus on assessments as an immediate instrument to reducing a numerical awarding gap risks overshadowing much more complex and layered anti-racist interventions in the university. So in our research, we're not concerned with what caused the gap to reduce and then widen. We're interested in what happened when the gap did reduce. That is, what difference did narrowing of the awarding gap make to the lives of racially minoritized graduates in the UK? We ask, did a good degree for racially minoritized graduates open careers in research and innovation? And our approach to answering this question was that we drew on a mix of qualitative and quantitative data. We drew on 10 years of quantitative data from the Higher Education Statistics Agency, or HESA, on graduate outcomes and destinations of leavers surveys. We held 11 focus groups with racially minoritized graduates from across the UK, which included some international students. And we held 18 one-to-one interviews, including 2 with international students. Our report, which we've produced already from this research, and I hope we can share in the link, share a link in the chat, goes into a lot more detail about all of the images that I'm going to be sharing with you. So this is just a snapshot. So looking at that main research question, did a good degree for racially minoritized graduates open careers in research and innovation? First, we disaggregated the data on awarding gaps by sex, ethnicity, and institution type. And I'm going to touch on these variables in the next few graphics. This one in particular looks at institution type. So that first image looks at post-92 universities, and the other looks at Russell Group universities. And based over 10-year trends, 3 things stood out to us. The first, that racial minorities are more likely to gain a good degree from non-Russell Group universities than Russell Group ones. This is especially true of Black graduates, which in the charts is the orange line. Over 60% of Black graduates with a good degree achieved this from a post-92 university in 21 in 2021, which was the year that we were looking at, the 2 years that we're looking at. For Russell Group institutions, Black graduates fare the worst in terms of good degree awards, with fewer than 15%. And this is despite the number of Black graduates being awarded a good degree increasing by 3.3% since 2012, when we first started looking at the data. So this chart here looks at the proportion of good degrees by sex and ethnicity. We only look at the variables that were in the original survey, which is why we use the designation male and female, and discounted for very small sample returns anyone that ticked a box other than male and female. Across all the institutions that we looked at, all different types of institutions, women outperform men in degree outcomes. And the greatest difference within degree outcome, within racial groups, is between Black men and Black women. So you see at the bottom left-hand corner of the chart there. Black women consistently outperform Black men in degree outcomes to a greater degree than any other racial group. Okay. The quantitative data establishes that while the awarding gap narrowed between 2019 and 2021 between white and all racial minority graduates, the gap remained the widest for Black graduates and the narrowest for those of mixed heritage, which is consistent with the pre-pandemic years. So far, we're not seeing how much of a difference the pandemic actually made. So then looking again at still at the quantitative data on where did racial minorities go after 2020-21, over a 10-year period, what we looked at was people who went into study and people who went into employment. And graduates with good degrees are far more likely to enter employment than further study after graduation. And in 2020-21, the results were broadly consistent with the immediate years preceding the pandemic. All employed graduates are more likely to be in professional roles than non-professional roles, which is what's shown in these charts. By ethnicity, employed Black graduates with a good degree are the ethnic group that is least likely to report being in professional roles and the most likely to report being in non-professional roles. In 2019 to 2020, if you cast your minds back, that's when the pandemic first hit our screens and the first national lockdowns were announced in the UK. When this uncertainty of the pandemic was most pronounced, it affected our 2020 graduates. And just over 70% of all employed good degree holders reported being in a professional role at this time. This fell to 67% for Black employed good degree holders. So looking at professional roles by institution type across all racial groups, Russell Group graduates are overrepresented in professional roles for good degree holders. And this is also true of Black Russell Group graduates. Looking at then the qualitative impact of a good degree, professionally and personally. And here we felt it was important, and as we have been doing all along, to tease out where Black graduates sit within these wider pictures. And that's because for Black graduates, the awarding gap is the greatest. It's the most pronounced of all racial groups. So what we found looking at more qualitative data is that self-defining a good degree matters. All respondents valued its material impact in getting a job or securing entry to a master's programme and more. There was value added to family, so being a source of advice for others. And professionally, a Black woman with a first reported immense pride at beating the odds, adding, "I bring up my first all the time, because I know that I'm a Black woman and in my job, they will take my intelligence away from me every single time." Self-defining good does not mean lowering standards or expectations for a particular degree result, but expanding ideas of the meaningful value of degree outcomes. So all interviewees, and we interviewed people who had a technically good degree, which is a 2-1 or a first, and identified as racial minorities, all wanted to or were pursuing further study, with financial means playing the largest role in their ability to do so. So for Russell Group graduates that we interviewed, finances were largely covered by scholarships, and ring-fenced scholarships for racial minorities at master's level were rare, but pivotal in shaping disciplinary ambitions. So one of our respondents explained, I never thought about doing a master's, and I definitely hadn't thought about doing one purely out of enjoyment or passion for a subject. It was more like, this is my career plan. Therefore, the steps to get there are A, B, C. But I hadn't thought, oh, I can just study something that I'm really interested. It was only a scholarship ring-fenced for Black graduates that enabled this person to pursue their own intellectual and scholarly interests. We found that for graduates pursuing a master's degree at non-Russell Group institutions, there was a greater sense that any master's programme pursued was because it was instrumental for jobs or career prospects, and likely reflected the institutional environment that focuses on graduate employment and careers. Across institution type, for Black graduates, academic staff were pivotal. Black academic staff were pivotal for further study. For example, a Black woman with a first pursuing a PhD at a non-Russell Group institution shared, my colleague said, you just need to get a good degree and you could go straight on to doing your PhD without a master's. In fact, I'm going to start calling you Dr. X from now on. And it worked. My friends started calling me Dr. X. And then a Black woman professor called me Dr. X. And I'm like, how can I not? I've been inspired. So while a good degree made postgraduate study an option and thereafter careers in research and innovation, the experiences of Black graduates especially were shaped by an academic environment where being understood and seen mattered, symbolised here by Black academics validating their knowledge-making abilities and encouraging them. Within Russell Group graduates, the pursuit of postgraduate study was shaped by access to scholarships and finance, which can enable graduates to pursue areas of scholarly interest over more instrumental concerns for employment. Whereas we found for non-Russell Group graduates, the pursuit of postgraduate study was rarely for, primarily, interest and enjoyment, but for building a career path. The idea of postgraduate study purely for personal interest was highly unusual. So turning now to one of the third sub-question that we asked is, what role did COVID-19 play in graduate pathways? And then teasing out again what this meant particularly for Black graduates. And the first thing to note here is, of course, the timing and this idea of the pandemic in the pandemic. This relates to the events of Black Lives Matter and the revival of this global movement and what it led to, which is what we're calling the hypervisibility of Black students, especially in 2020. So hypervisibility came with an additional workload of outreach, support, and care responsibilities for other Black and racially minoritized students, particularly in the absence of university action on racism. And this appeared predominantly in the experiences of Russell Group graduates. So on hypervisibility, one of our respondents who attended a predominantly white institution in a predominantly white town added and explained how he used his hypervisibility to shout at the university about the dual pandemics of COVID and racism on students of colour. He added, it shouldn't be the job of students to do anything other than be students. But when you come into a university as a student of colour, you don't necessarily choose to be an activist. Some people just want to be students. And almost unilaterally, every student of colour is forced to be a spokesperson. In this, the students are continuing a much longer tradition of necessary anti-racist activism in their universities. It's also worth noting that not all racially minoritized students felt the need to be an activist at university, which may or may not relate to whether or not they were seen as a racial representative in their context. The more racial minorities there were in a place, the less the burden was placed on specific, visible individual students. So COVID-19 and the changes in their institutions to assessment and learning played either a neutral or a positive role in the lives of all respondents' study habits and degree outcomes. For 2020 graduates, this was partly because a large portion of their degree result was already confirmed in the case of modular assessment. For 2021 graduates, there was greater room to improve their average, and self-described introverts who felt out of place preferred COVID restrictions that aided them to study. But that sentiment of a neutral or positive impact of COVID on degree outcomes masks the disparate experiences of learning during COVID and the different enabling environments that in some cases meant a neutral impact was the outcome of major adjustments and overcoming significant challenges. This included having to look after young siblings, making a desk by balancing books on a bed, and elder care. So one respondent shared that I did think of coming home when the university closed, but at that point I couldn't go home because at that time the economy was very slow and I felt adding myself to the family is just going to increase their expenses. So I just decided to stay here. In this, our respondent is revealing class dynamics and the impact of COVID in the lives of racially minoritized graduates. The third element that I want to highlight in the role that COVID played is its impact on poor mental health, arising not only during the pandemic years, but having continued into the lives of many postgraduate lives. So while respondents assessed only limited implications resulting from the pandemic on their career plans, most felt fortunate to have secured employment or places for further study in a generally difficult economic environment for graduates. Indirectly, COVID-19 appears to have had a lingering effect on the terms and conditions that graduates are prepared and able to work in, like having a preference for hybrid that is tied to their mental health. So one respondent, reflecting on the growing trend for employees to spend more time in an office, shared it would be so daunting, so tiring. This is something I would not look for unless it was absolutely necessary financially, even if this limits my career choices. But it's also something I know that if I had to come into the office, it would negatively affect my mental health. So let me offer a few conclusions. That question we asked is, did a good degree for racially minoritized graduates open careers in research and innovation? And the answers are that narrowing of the white racial minority awarding gap in 2021 does not appear to have opened careers in research and innovation for racial minorities with a good degree outcome. It consistently stayed the same in the quantitative data. Over that 10-year horizon, it's the same. But the qualitative data strikes a note of caution in reading the quantitative data that suggests COVID-19 did not overly impact degree outcomes and graduate pathways. A more detailed and nuanced picture of life in 2020 and 21 for racial minorities identifies the profound level of effort that was required to stand still, to neutralize the impact of COVID, that is to stay on track for a good degree outcome. Crucial factors to opening careers in research and innovation for racial minorities, especially for Black graduates, appear to be the availability of scholarships, with ring-fenced scholarships offering intellectual freedom and combating the apparent exclusivity of scholarships to Russell Group graduates. So thinking about what do these findings mean for policy and operational agenda that are focused on awarding gaps as a proxy for addressing racial inequity in higher education. For Patel and I, it was important to think through policy implications in terms of high-level policy making, so at the Office for Students, for example, and the ways in which the premium is placed on quantitative data, and operational agenda, looking at those student success teams within universities. What can they do with some of our findings? And what we settled on was asking whose idea of success matters the most. So the degree outcome or the degree result is not the singular most meaningful measure of success. Treating it like it is in policy and in operational agenda has three main effects. The first, it crowds out student-informed ways of identifying success. The second, quantitative measures of success may then be pushed onto students with interventions that are designed to service degree results. For example, mentoring, essay writing, and so forth. And the third, it risks an artificial separation of a good degree from the racializing conditions of higher education. Success for racially minoritized graduates requires a policy push for institutions to confront structural racism through a deeper and more nuanced understanding of how it manifests in the experiences of students, which will likely extend institutional regulatory obligations. The current policy and operational goals of closing awarding gaps, while important, fall short of capturing the full scope of what it means for many racially minoritized students to successfully complete a degree, and do not account for the resilience or resourcefulness that students demonstrate in navigating the structural barriers that they face. So this research challenges institutions and policymakers to expand their definitions of success, moving beyond narrow metrics to include student-informed notions of achievement, which reflect the complexity of their experiences and indicate the measures required for genuine equity in higher education. This graphic, I don't expect you to read it all, and I'm not going to talk through it all. It is in our report, is how we broke down the operational, practical actions that our three constituencies that we're speaking to can do. So that's the policymakers and regulators, university leaders, and operational teams. And I'm going to